no retreat, no surrender. We not lotion, pet or powder. We tell them no retreat, no surrender. We not lotion, pet or powder.
And shalom ta. As always, greetings to one and all. This is indeed your brethren, Lidj, Yefdi, Yefdeyah, Ras Tafari, Renaissance.com. And specifically for this particular podcast, we sought to just bring out a few more ideas and put a few more things on the table, especially for we as Ras Tafari in this particular time which we're living in, and most of the events that have taken shape over the past few years. We had sought to really get to more pertinent topics like this at a earlier stage, or at an earlier period, so to speak, but certain things transpired and we find ourselves in a position now where we still are very on high alert to just put ones on notice of certain things such as these. And what we are speaking on specifically, just to cut to the chase, as they would say, looking at the positions in which we hold as far as ideals and certain ideologues, speaking on cannabis, speaking on marijuana, as they say. And really, just to say the least, I don't know if ones have been up on many of the policies that have come to play as of late, especially within the past couple of days, just within the turn of this new Gregorian year in 2018. But just to lay the groundwork, so to speak, we, for the most part, at least ones who, have trotted with us or really have shared certain times, especially with the podcast here with us from, such a time, and have spent, a great deal in an elongated period with us as far as following certain principles and looking into certain themes of history, especially the near history, as we would say, around the times of a generation or so ago, so 40 to at least 100 years, in the past, and dealing with what we have here presently, all kind of comes full circle in a sort of, I guess you can say, time sort of continuum, just to put things in a certain perspective. But and knowing the position, as we sit here on the outset, of Rastafari as an ideology in a sense, and really so, pulling most of that ideology, of course, from, what we would call the Christ mind, or what we would call a biblical perspective, so on, so forth. We definitely take heed to the principles and the standards of the elders at one particular time, and making sure that we, uphold most of those standards, and even so knowing all of the persecution that came with Rastafari and many of the Rastafari, not only on these shores and in the Caribbean more specifically, and those across, the entire international spectrum that had taken certain stances when it came to cannabis or marijuana, etc., etc. Ones had really suffered physical, mental, spiritual, just junctures where they really were not only at the threat of their lives and their livelihood, but really withstanding so much at such a time. And, as again we mentioned, an overexposed amount of time dealing with certain authoritative figures, certain political factions, certain social stigma to a certain, outset, and again, withstanding that throughout, the test of time. We've come here, and again, I mentioned, I don't know if ones have really been up on a lot of the policies that have come forward, but of course, we make this known to our constituency here in the fellowship and those, of course, who will be tuning in here, that as of January 1st, 2018, there has been much in the political and policy spectrum that has moved toward the legalization of medical and recreational marijuana. Now, on the outset, we have discussed this amongst the Habarim, especially Brother Yaden, myself, Brother Ice, and many other ones as well. We, are still recalling a story from Brother Aaron over in the UK from such a time, especially here on Discipleship Radio, thinking on many other ones like Brother Baruch, who of course had a stick, and as many of us have, over the amount of years, and of course coming, to the podcast, and even so in our own perspective groups, voicing our opinions, and just forming short contingencies for the short term, and making certain plans in a sense for the long term. But it really has brought us to a particular time. And so I'm not sure if ones actually saw this, maybe flash across their screen if they just so happen to turn the television on or catch a news reel, or, maybe on their way to work or coming from work, or, just out and about, maybe heard something here or there. But even so, it was whispered. I can really say that, just to say the least, on at least from that outset coming across, Anna's own desk. We heard that in a very, very subtle and quiet whisper. And even so, just to, again, lay the framework as far as, what states, had been considering from, at least just a couple of years, well, a year or so ago, as it is just now 2018, as per their count. And, again, just gathering a lot of information from many sites, many particular media outlets, but of course this one coming from a diagram that came up around the election time in 2016 from Business Insider, and we of course compared that with a number of numerous other diagrams that show just slight differences between certain states that were already considering and moving towards legalization in a recreational sense, quote unquote, and also those who were considering it from a medical standpoint. And that really just kind of, raised a lot of eyebrows on many instances for we, as far as that was concerned. But even so, with the first particular diagram, those states here on these shores that were seeking to legalize marijuana to that certain extent were, in effect, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, of course, California, Alaska, Maine, Massachusetts, and Colorado. Now, of course, for many of these, in this instance, a lot of the laws had been passed, especially for California, Oregon, and Colorado, which I'm sure many other ones have known, but Washington, Maine, Massachusetts, and Alaska, of course, also passed legislation on this particular topic during November 2016 as well. Now, as far as the medical usages and the, I guess you can say the challenges, or, whatever opposition was standing at that time, they, of course, went at a certain, I guess you can say, configuration, or, started the talks or having the conversations, to a helm, and they were really, ramping up those conversations to a certain point to where many ones within the state or these particular states had really pushed for this to go through legislation, where Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, Florida, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And of course, Hawaii, rounding up that in on the medical usages. And as far as November 2016, in a legalization standpoint, as far as the medical sense, they were passed for these states in a medical sense also. And for particular ones, especially within that number of November 2016, only North Dakota, Arkansas, and Florida had actually passed legalization as far as that is concerned from November 2016. And this, of course, again, is coming from Business Insider from 2016. Now, as far as 2018, as I mentioned, just a slight difference, but as far as the legalization for quote-unquote recreational use, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, California, Alaska, Colorado, Massachusetts, and Maine retained their legalization standpoint as far as recreational use, quote unquote, and held their positions. So as far as, maybe having a certain amount, many ones say within or under what they would consider an ounce of marijuana in one's possession would not be deemed as illegal as far as that is concerned. And again, we have to brush up ourselves even on these particular laws and this legalization that has come through. But even so, with the medical, on the other hand, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maryland, Delaware, Florida, Arkansas, New Mexico, Arizona, but also adding in Hawaii and Louisiana. Louisiana joining that number for medical usages on that sense. And it really, really started to, come together, a little bit before 2016, but even so coming to this specific date here in January of 2018. We really started to see the bigger picture. Now, of course, ones would, throw this out to say, okay, well, the big businesses, of course, are, just pending to come in, and that, we can't disagree with much of that sentiment. And just to, add to that on a certain number, we also have to make sure that we as Ras Tafari specifically have to make sure that we, again, prepare ourselves, because it's still, not even so too late to take heed to what is going on around us. But if we are to be, as scripture says, just stewards of the Father's creation, are we willing to sit certain things out, especially when we can actually, do some good? And I'm not, throwing these things out just to say that one should or shouldn't, try to find ways in which they could, benefit and also help others within this particular time. Because what we actually even saw that was most interesting about this was, if ones have been, up on much of the information that has been coming out of the opioid epidemic, or the opioid crisis, however they may be coining it as of these days, we found what was so interesting was that the usages within the quote-unquote medical marijuana had been a great resource for treatment and healing of those who suffered the drug uses and the, of course, combinational usages of opioids that has been sweeping the nation for, over the past, we really can't even say how long, but just from a standpoint, and for the sake of argument or the sake of, making this presentation, the better part of 2 decades. And it's seeing its ramping up within the last few years, we should say, so around the past 5 to 10 years. So very interesting that what was coined as a drug that had this, you know, insatiable social stigma and really brought about legislation and policies that would imprison, criminalize, and imprison, so many ones, especially as we would say of the black and brown sheep here in this particular country, was so pervasive and brought about such a mass incarceration of ones and persecution of ones. And this is all after the fact, of course, of such the push from ones, such as Peter Tosh, of course, also with his daughter, who has been, very vocal just on the outset, just to say for pushing for legalization, not only within Jamaica, but within even on these shores. She's been a part of many talks and has contributed many, 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 many outlets, many social gatherings, many scientifical gatherings. I mean, she's participated in, I'm thinking, at least the school escapes me, but we had saw many outlets, and ones can, just research Peter Tosh's daughter up in many of these talks and many of these, media news networks, and of course they're outside of the spectrum of your mass media, but she has been a part of many of these talks that have shown that the push for legislation has never slowed down. But in a sense, we again have to keep in mind our spiritual path within this, our own, as they would say from their own law perspective, our religious, quote unquote, lawful usages of this particular item. And just to say the least, them finding out that this was such a important and pertinent object that could be used for healing just says it all on that sense. And just to, not to be, very childish in such a way to say certain things in that manner, but a big told you so is just a big told you so. There's nothing that ones can do about that, seeing as how the Ras Tafari from such a time coming from the 1930s on up until this very date had, made exclamations that, of course, this particular item, this particular plant, this particular herb was indeed the healing of the nation, scripturally speaking, and now we actually see it in real time, in reality. And they're having to face facts on that. But of course, keeping this all on the hush, keeping ones away from, all of the benefits that could come within the usages and utilization of this particular item, we find that, again, this is pretty much why this particular world system is in such the bind that it is in. Now, as far as continuing within this way this walking is trod, ones, of course, still are in the positions that they are in, economically, spiritually, socially, and physically. And we definitely have to take into consideration, with the tides turning at such a pace that they are, how can ones aggregate their resources, aggregate their works, and again deal with ones of like minds and those who have been affected by such situations, that they not only can benefit with themselves and those around them, but others as well, all at the same time. So it's a very daunting task, but again, just to put this out there on the outset for ones to just begin to think on these particular topics, especially on an economic sense. Again, thinking to that great parable there from our New Testament of the great and just steward. That's just a thought for certain ones. And of course, we had sent certain things out with the first day economic opportunities update. And we, of course, sought to turn that into a post on Rastafari Renaissance as well as RastafariGroundation.org, which ones can check out. Because, of course, from over such a time, we mentioned in the update that we had been following this particular story for, I don't, maybe a couple of years, I would say, at least a couple of years, as far as the policy and how things were beginning to turn as they have and such up until this point. And we found that just very interesting, just to say the least, and how, of course, as always, Jah, again, doing his mighty work to reveal to certain ones. And even so, I wouldn't even say reveal it, I would say ones coming to the realization that they couldn't fight it as fervently as they had been fighting it before. And even at the helm of losing much, not only in finances and influence as far as that goes on the minds of the people, but actually beginning to lose the people themselves, especially with this opioid crisis, this opioid epidemic, as they say. And certain times, especially from the early mid to late 90s, ones were just on drugs, as they would say, at least around our way, as they would say, as always throughout the days and certain times past. But of course, the pushback on the rhetoric, the pushback on the influence, the pushback on the propaganda brought ones into such a mind frame that they had to concede, not only to the point of Rastafari, but of course to the point of the scriptural text as well. And certain ones still fight this, of course, even at this very moment as we see the tides turning, and ones will as they continue to do their research and find out much, much more about most of these things that are going on. But even so, just to share with ones what we had been finding, again, these articles are coming out at such a rapid pace that you're just going to be bombarded once you start doing your research and finding all of the articles that continue to come out. And I mean, we're coming from the New York Times, the Washington Post, Huffington Post, NBC News, whatever outlet you may check out from certain time to time, whether it be mass media or they be what they call minor media outlets. Even so, here from the Wall Street Journal, and this is dated from November 19th, 2017. The title reads, "Can marijuana alleviate the opioid crisis? The federal government should stop blocking research into the drug's medical potential." And, just to give a synopsis on this particular article here, it was, an interesting read, just to say the least. And just a short snippet of it here. Jennifer, a 37-year-old Virginia school teacher, now unable to work due to unrelenting pain caused by a genetic spinal disease, stared hopelessly at the bottle of opioids her doctor had prescribed her. Beset by desperation, discomfort, she faced a difficult choice. The opioids would provide limited relief, but came with a high risk of addiction. Or she could try marijuana, which would likely be safer, but put her on the wrong side of the law. Now, of course, the story just goes on and on to explain this dilemma which this one, Jennifer, a Virginia school teacher, had been placed in front. And even so, we have stories amongst our own constituency, from across, from across many nations that were put in certain positions such as these. And again, just coming to the helm again, as the Rastafari proverb has always said, it is indeed the healing of the nations. And ones, are finding it harder and harder to deny that. But even so, what I guess I wouldn't say troubles me in a certain sense, but it definitely brings a certain amount of concern to the topic is all of the big business, all of the grandeur of commerce that is coming into much of what could now become the great big business within what they would call pot, marijuana, so on and so forth, weed. These are the names that they place upon the herb. But again, looking at the situation for what it is, ones could begin the research, begin searching into certain things. As we mentioned, most of the states that have gone full-fledged legalization of the herb and started to loosen and decriminalize much of the particular laws in this particular sense, and even so within Canada. Canada also another country that has sought to push forward. We'll have to recheck again on the specific dates and the current situation within that, but Canada also looking to fully legalize marijuana to a certain extent. We'll have to check, all of the parameters of this, for many of, our listeners and, many of our constituency, big up to, Brother Habte Gabriel, who definitely comes to mind, and many other ones, of course, who are residing in that part of the world also, but we, of course, think of Uruguay or Uruguay. They're in South America, fully legalized marijuana in that particular country. And there's another country which we are thinking of, but it escapes us at this moment. But we intend to follow up on most of these particular stories because this is, again, an opportunity. And an opportunity at one particular stance where we are at this moment, especially coming within this year. It's just January 4th as we are doing this recording. Most of these policies and legalities are only coming to their helm as of January 1st, 2018. So this just, even so, puts a lot of things again into the scope of our view as to where we are in this world, especially intellectually, and really should fuel us at a certain part within ourselves spiritually at this moment, seeing these things come to fruition, and then of course seeing the research, seeing all of the advances being made. This is again a major report that we should, as Ras Tafari especially, definitely take heed to. But much more to share on this. Just leaving this on the table for ones to research and, of course, start to formulate their plans. This, time is drawing so short. It's 2018. 2019, as far as many of our counts and many other ones, also from 1619 to 2019, that will mark 400 years. And even so, we still are, a bit shaky on a lot of the facts, a lot of the prophetic models, and all of the things that continue to come to us at a certain time and space, and which we are dealing with as they come. But again, just to leave that on the table for once, the time is drawing so near, and we, of course, have to begin to prepare ourselves. At all costs, prepare yourselves.